Good morning, Lighthouse. This morning I'm going to tell you a story written by Oscar Wilde over 100 years ago. It's called The Selfish Giant. Every afternoon as they were coming home from school, the children used to go and play in the giant's garden. It was a large, lovely garden with soft green grass. Here and there, over the grass, stood beautiful flowers like stars. One day, the giant came back.
"What are you doing here?"
he cried in a very gruff voice, and the children ran away.
"My own garden is my own garden,"
said the giant.
"and anyone can understand that. And I will allow nobody to play in it but myself."
So he built a high wall all around it and put up a notice board. "Trespassers will be prosecuted." He was a very selfish giant. Then the spring came, and all over the country there were little blossoms and little birds. Only in the garden of the selfish giant, it was still winter. The birds did not care to sing in it, as there were no children, and the trees forgot to blossom.
"I cannot understand why spring is so late in coming,"
said the selfish giant as he sat in his window and looked out at his cold white garden.
"I hope there will be a change in the weather soon."
But the spring never came, nor the summer. The autumn gave golden fruits to every garden, but to the giant's garden she gave none. "He is too selfish," she said. So it was always winter there, and the north wind and the hail, the frost and the snow danced about through the trees. One morning the giant was lying awake in bed when he heard some lovely music.
"I believe the spring has come at last,"
said the giant, and he jumped out of bed. He saw a most wonderful sight. Through a little hole in the wall, the children had crept in, and they were sitting in the branches of the trees. In every tree he could see a little child, and the trees were so glad to have the children back again that they had covered themselves with blossoms and were waving their arms gently above the children's heads. The birds were flying about and twittering with delight, and the flowers were looking up through the green grass and laughing. It was a lovely scene, only in one corner it was still winter. It was the furthest corner of the garden, and in it was standing a little boy. He was so small that he couldn't reach up into the branches of the tree, and he was wandering all around it, crying bitterly. The poor tree was still quite covered with frost and snow, and the north wind was blowing and roaring above it. "Climb up, little boy," said the tree, and it bent its branches down as low as it could. But the little boy was too tiny. And the giant's heart melted as he looked out.
"How selfish I have been,"
he said.
"Now I know why the spring would not come here. I will put that little boy on top of the tree, and then I will go and knock down the wall, and my garden shall be the children's playground forever and ever."
He was really sorry for what he had done. He went out into the garden, But when the children saw him, they were so frightened that they all ran away, and the garden became winter again. Only the little boy did not run, for his eyes were so full of tears that he didn't see the giant coming. And the giant stole up behind him and took him gently in his hand and put him up into the tree. And the tree broke at once into blossom, and the birds sang on it, and the little boy stretched out his 2 arms and flung them round the giant's neck and kissed him. And the other children, when they saw that the giant wasn't wicked any longer, came running back, and with them came the spring.
"It is your garden now, little children,"
said the giant, and he took a great axe and knocked down the wall. All day long they played, and in the evening they came to the giant to bid him goodbye.
"But where is your little companion?"
he said.
"The boy I put into the tree."
The giant loved him the best because he had kissed him. "We don't know," answered the children. "He's gone away."
"You must tell him to be sure and come tomorrow,"
said the giant. But the children said they didn't know where he lived and they'd never seen him before. And the giant felt very sad. Years went by, and the giant grew very old and feeble. He couldn't play about any more, so he sat in a huge armchair and watched the children at their games and admired his garden.
"I have many beautiful flowers,"
he said.
"but the children are the most beautiful flowers of all."
One winter morning, he looked out of his window as he was dressing. He didn't hate the winter now, for he knew that it was merely the spring asleep and that the flowers were resting. Suddenly, he rubbed his eyes in wonder and looked and looked. It certainly was a marvellous sight. In the furthest corner of the garden was a tree quite covered with lovely white blossoms. Its branches were golden and silver fruit hung down from them, and underneath it stood the little boy that he had loved. Downstairs ran the giant in great joy and out into the garden. He hastened across the grass and came near the child. But when he came close, his face grew red with anger, and he said,
"Who have dared to wound thee?"
For on the palms of the child's hands were the prints of 2 nails, and the prints of 2 nails were on the little feet.
"Who have dared to wound thee?"
cried the giant.
"Tell me, that I may take my big sword and slay him."
No, answered the child. These are wounds of love.
"Who art thou?"
said the giant, and a strange awe fell on him, and he knelt before the little child. And the child smiled on the giant and said to him, "You let me play once in your garden. Today you shall come with me to my garden, which is paradise." I think that this story can teach us a lot about sharing, being kind to one another, and blessing other people. Its message is also about the way to heaven being through Jesus. Thank you all for listening.